Yeah, we get the Gemara. No, remember that. It's babies.
Okay. Today's daf is Daf Chaf Aleph. We finished Daf Chaf Amud Beis yesterday. We got into the beginning, or a little bit, into discussion of Shneim. Shneim, we discussed that although there are the group one is the classic group of Avelim, right? So these would be the same people that a Kayin is allowed to become Tameh for: a mother, father, son, daughter, brother, sister, and spouse. Those are the main seven. But right, that's the, let's say, the Deraisa according to the Rambam and the Rif, and according to the Gemara brought through Machlekes the Chachamim, Rabbi Akiva, and Rav, I think it was Rav Shimon Elazar. Yeah, Rav Shimon Elazar, who says they all have different permutations of it, but they all say that there's a second level of Avelim that you also have to be Noheg Avelis for, meaning if anyone from group one themselves become an Avel to their group ones, so father's father, mother's brother, all of the group one to group one.
Is that what someone posted last night on the chat?
I didn't see.
Oh, picture.
Yeah, is that in relation to the
he was posting about something else that was from Moed Kattan.
I thought that was in relation to all.
No, that was just following him. So I'll explain. So just we'll recap. So there's a three machlekes in the Gemara. Now technically it's brought in halacha that we do paskin that, meaning the Shulchan Aruch paskins that way, and in the poskim it seems that
Wow.
the Ramah brings. I think the Ramah brings that nowadays, since the halacha is you're only doing it as a covet. There's no ikar hadin avelis yunayeh. So since there's a din mechila, we assume, and not only do we assume, if someone nowadays decides to be makbid, we ignore him. Meaning, if someone says nowadays, "Oh, I'm makbid. I want." A person says, "I want my brother should be noyeg avelis because I have to deal with avelis over my whatever, whatever it is." We ignore him. We ignore him. We don't take his hakpada or his opinion, and we assume across the board as a community that effectively the din is at night. So practically speaking, it's not night. Regardless, the Gemara is coming off of that discussion and continuing to have that conversation. We're holding by a Meimar. Let me find the spot. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 lines from the bottom. Middle of the line. A Meimar. Yeah? Okay. A Meimar shachiv leid barbrei. A Meimar's son's son, so his grandson through his son, right? Son's son, passed away. Kara ilave, and he tore kriya. So again, this would be a grandson. So no matter which one of the opinions above, it would fit. Because even according to the middle opinion, the opinion of Rav Shimon Elazar, he said it's only father of the father and son of the son. Right? The other two opinions said it expanded to all groups. But regardless of whichever opinion you go with, Ameimar was Nayeg Avelis, and he tore kriya when he found out about the misa of his grandson. Asebrei and his son, meaning the father of the person who died, and Kara Ba'ape, and simple read here is that Ameimar ripped again a second time in front of his son, meaning to say he realized that the first time he ripped tore kriya was really a waste of time because he doesn't have an ikar hadin to tear kriya. He's not really an avel. It's only as a covet to the person who is experiencing the real avelis that so once his son came, he tore again. And then Idkar Dimiyushav Kara, then he realized when he tore the second time that he was seated while he did it. And the halacha is that you need to do the kriya while you're standing, which is true. So so he ripped the third time. So Ameimar tore the kriya the first time, which was a waste of time. The second time was when he realized that it was only being done in front of his son as a covet, but he only did that covet while sitting. Supposed to do it while sitting, so he then tore a third time while standing. Amr Rav Ashila Ameimar, meaning you Ameimar, you just did this, triplicate of kriya. Obviously, you hold that kriya is the me'umit. So kriya the me'umit, and where do you know this halacha from that you have to do kriya dafka when you're standing? It comes from a pasuk. The pasuk says Dechsiv Vayakam Iyai Vayikra Esmi Ilai. Iyav, we know, who had terrible yisurim. That's the whole story of Iyai. But he got up, he stood Vayakam Vayikra and tore Esmi Ilai, his coat, his clothing. His record. So when his children died, you see Iyov was Nayeg Avelis, and the kriya happened only after standing. So therefore, you learn from over there that you need to stand when you do the kriya. Read the Gemara 1 second. Are you telling me that when you have a juxtaposition of two verbs, Vayakam Vayikra, he got up, he stood and tore, that we're to understand that one is sequentially needed before the second, right? Meaning is way we understand the pasuk. Elameata in the pasuk by chalitza, right? We know the halacha is if that a man has a brother and a wife, and he dies without leaving any children over to his wife, that his brother has to take his spot. Well, what if the brother doesn't like the sister-in-law? And he's like, I don't want to marry her. I'm not interested. So he doesn't have to do it. He could say, and he writes it, right? He says, Lo chafatzti lakachta, I have no interest in marrying her. So what does it say? It says over there that when he's going to do chalitza, it says, V'amad, stand up, V'amar, and say, Lo chafatzti lakachta. So if this is true, that the drasha can come, that he stood up and tore, means that in order to tear, you must stand. Then over here, when he says, V'amad v'amar, he stands and says, it's mashma that in order to do chalitza, he needs to do chalitza while standing. And we know that that's not true. How do we know that that's not true? Asked the Gemara. So hachanami, are you telling me that that's true? V'hatanya, the Brisa says, bein yoishiv, that chalitza can be done while sitting, bein noimin while standing, bein mutta while lying down or reclining, meaning there's no requirement for you to stand. So how can you tell me that the first pasuk, vayakam vayikra, he stood up and tore, means that you actually have to stand? Maybe that's just what he did. Maybe he got up and tore, but maybe you could even do the kriya while you're sitting. Just like we'll say the same thing by chalitza, that even though it says va'amar, he got up. So this is a little bit of a difference.
Why are we making a comparison from chalitza to?
We're not making a comparison in the halacha. We're making a comparison in the structure of the pasuk. Meaning, the question the Gemara is having over here is do you have a right to infer from the pasuk? If I said to you, and then he went and put his tefillin on, does that mean every time I put tefillin on, I have to travel? Or no, is that phrase, and he went to put tefillin on, just, that's what he did. But if he was sitting in a chair, he also puts tefillin on. Can I tell you that first verb is important and required for the second verb, or no? It just happens to be what happened. So the pasuk over here says, Vayakom, he got up and tore. So can I assume that means you must stand up when you do kriya? Or does it just mean this guy, Eov, when he tore, he happened to stand up? So if you're going to tell me that I have a right to assume that Vayakom here means you must get up beforehand, then you should make the same drasha by chalitza, because you have the exact same formula, the same permutation of verbs. First he got up, and then he says, I don't want to marry her. So it must be that chalitza needs to be done standing, because you have that same exact structure. So the Gemara says, we know that that's not true. So maybe to begin with, the entire permutation of this verb followed by another verb in this way isn't to be understood as a chiyuv to stand. Maybe it was just what happened that Eov did. So the Gemara says, no, there's a slight difference in the two psukim. Amar like, Hasam, in the case of Eov, in the case of chalitza, loiksiv vayamad vayomer, that he will stand and he will say. It says that he stood up and said. So maybe there, standing up is really just how it happened to have occurred, but it's not necessarily what you must do. Whereas hacha, by the case of Avelis and Kriya, it says vayakam vayikra, he got up and tore. So you see over here, it's a slight difference in past tense versus future tense, and so there's enough of a distinction. So maybe the Gemara says there's a distinction, and therefore we do have a drasha, at least at this point. Amar Rabbi Bar Chama, he repeats the same thing. Minayin lekriya shehima um. And how do I know that kriya, when a person tears kriya, that it has to be done standing? Shenemar, the pasuk says, same pasuk. Vayakam iyay vayikra. So the Gemara, now 1 second, same question. Dilma milsa yisera sehudav. Maybe Iyai, who's experiencing such terrible yisurim, such terrible suffering, maybe he did this kriya in this stronger way, that he was going to only tear, because he experienced terrible pain. So for him, okay, he did it that way. But ikar hadin, meaning maybe the halach is that he doesn't have to. And I'll prove to you that that's the case. Why? The Eloi Temahach, because if you don't say that, the pasuk continues and says that what else did Eov do? Vayiga. He shaved his head, pulled his hair out. There's no halacha like that. It could be it's also, right? So obviously you're not going to understand it literal that every single thing that Eov did was to be understood as Meikar Adin. Maybe he did some extra things, and you don't have a right to look at his behavior and conclude from there that the halacha is you must stand your do kriya. So the Gemara says, are you going to tell me Vayigas Asrosha, that's Hachanami, that's the case? So that can't be. Ella, the Gemara concludes that's the pasuk that we're coming from Eov is not the makar for the din kriya that it needs to be done while standing. Rather, what's the pasuk? It's from David HaMelech. David HaMelech was informed incorrectly, but informed that his sons had passed. In fact, that his other son had killed his brother. Vayakam HaMelech vayikra es begadim. And so when David HaMelech initially heard it, he got up and tore it. And here it's being said exactly like the same way we saw by Eov. Vayakam, and he got up, vayikra, and he tore. Right? So this would work. This would be a good drasha. The Gemara says 1 second. Maybe we'll say the same thing. Vidilma milsi yisirasa. Maybe David HaMelech was was overreacting, and La'ilam, there's no requirement to stand up. Maybe in that moment he was hit with such terrible feelings that he felt that he needed to stand up to do the Kriya, but Me'ikar Adin he didn't have to. And I'll prove to you that that's the case, because if you continue the pasuk, you'll see the pasuk says that David HaMelech not only did he stand up and tear, he also vayishkav arza, that he lied down on the floor. And you see that that's certainly not Me'ikar Adin what we do. There's no inyan of lying down on the floor for Avelas. In fact, we'll see that if you lie down, nothing. Hachanami, are you telling me that that's required halacha? That can't be. V'hatanya, the Brisa says, Yoshan, they changed the here, al gabe mita, if a person lies down on the bed, and again here we mean to say without mattresses, let's say, al gabe kisei, or on a chair without a cushion, meaning again, you're coming up with your own ways of sort of creating some discomfort in how you sleep. Al gabe udyaini, or if you did it on some sort of like a bench or some type of, I don't know, outdoor bench, I don't know. And here the gears they change it to Gidoyla Mikulan, and not only that, even a bigger chiddush, Amru, they said that Afilu al Gabe Karka, even if you went ahead and you made it even more uncomfortable than it would be even on a bed, Lo Yatza Yidei Chayvasa. Meaning what? We hold that doing any of these things, you're not Yotze Yidei, you're Kefiyas Hamita. Kefiyas Hamita is a din. You got to turn your bed over. This is a specific type of Hanhaga, Nihu Gavelus. You're not Yotze. So we don't do it anymore anyways, but I'm saying in the times that they did it, you see clearly that what David HaMelech was doing was not, it's not that you can't, it's that it's not considered, you're not Yotze your Kfiyas Amita, and if you're not Yotze your Kfiyas Amita, then that means basically what you're doing is not Mikra Adin, it's certainly not required, certainly if you're not Yotze, so you can't bring me, so what are you trying to tell me? You're trying to tell me that what David HaMelech was doing was all Mikra Adin? That's not. He lied down on the ground, and that's certainly not Mikra Adin. So maybe when he stood up in Tor Kriya, that was also not Mikra Adin. So you don't have a raya. Gemara says, that's the explanation of what it means in the Brisa here, that Lo Yotzi Dechavasi, you're not Yotzi Kfiyas Amita, which again implies that if you lie down on the floor, you're not doing anything. There's certainly no requirement to do that. Amr Lei says, no, Ke'ein Arza. What it means when it says in the Pasuk, La Yishkav Arza, that David HaMelech lied down, doesn't mean that he lied down on the ground. It means that he lied down like on the ground, which means gufa kfiyas amita, meaning so basically David HaMelech did what he's supposed to do by kfiyas amita, and we'll therefore assume that when he stood up to tear kriya, he was standing up because he had to stand up, and therefore you have a good makar for standing up when you tear kriya. So the kfiyas amita part of this is really irrelevant nowadays, as Taisus is we're not going to go through it, but Taisus points out we don't do kfiyas amita nowadays anyways, because he says our beds are already different than the beds in the times of the Gemara. Our beds already have posters, so if you flip the bed over, it's basically the same thing upside down, right? I mean, most beds you would have legs, the legs become the posts become the legs, and you just turn the mattress over. I mean, what does it help? But in their beds, when they were like sort of strapped, the way they constructed their beds, there really was a difference. But what comes out from over here is that Me'ikar Adin Kriya is done be'amida, which is the halacha. Okay, new Brisa, very chashuv, very important. You say the Brisa, Elu dvarim she'avel aser b'hen. The following things. And this is not an exhaustive list. All the Rishonim point out there will be things in this that are not in this list that are also true of an avel. But here we're specifically talking about Isurim. Aser b'malacha, he's aser to do malacha, and we're talking here during Shiva, right? Uberechitza, washing. Uvesicha, anointing with oil. Ubetach mishamita, with his wife. Ubeniila sasandal, right? He has to take off comfortable shoes, put on, or not wear shoes. The aser likros b'Torah, it's aser to learn Torah. Nevi'im, Ksuvim, Ulishanas b'Mishnah, can't learn Mishnah, can't learn Medrash, can't learn Halacha. Can't learn Bahashas, which again, what's the difference in Mishnah and Shas? You have to work it out. Uva Agodas, and Agodas here does not mean Musar. Well, that's a Shaila. Well, so it's a Shaila, maybe it does mean Musar. Uva Agodas. However, if this Avel is a Rav, and people need him, and so for him, therefore, to say Bahashas and do these things is part of his job, the tzibur needs him, then the halacha is Eino Nimna, he does not prevent himself from learning, and if he needs to learn in order to prepare to speak or whatever it is, then he's mutter. Yeah, well. Hashem will learn these halachas a little bit more deeply. We'll see, not by you, but you know. There was a Maisa where the son of Rabbi Yossi died. It was in Sipuri. The nichnas the base medrash, and he went into the base medrash. But Darish Kolayim Kulo, and he went and said drashos all day long, meaning because the rabbin needed him. This is the brisa. Let's just continue a little bit over here, and then maybe I'll mention just a little bit about the halachas of learning Torah as a novel. Rabbi Bar Chana Israel Bei Milsa. Rabbi Bar Chana became an Avel. And for a moment he thought maybe I won't go to yeshiva, I won't go to Beis Medrash to say the Shiur, meaning counter to what we just learned. Amar Le Rabbi Chanina said to him, "What do you mean? You got to go. He says, okay, well, if the halach is I gotta go, he says, okay, then let me do it. I'm gonna do it on the best way possible. Savar le'ukma an moira, like he thought maybe I'm gonna bring him a turgum. I mean, the way they used to do the drushes is he'd come and say a drasha, and he wouldn't just say it over to like a little group like this. He'd say it over to the whole kehillah. So sometimes he didn't have the voice to be able to, to get the whole olam to hear it. So he'd bring Mordechai Shapiro would come in and he'd say the Dvar Torah, and the Mordechai would say it out loud so everyone could hear it. So he'd bring him a Torah. He really wanted to do this the right way. He says, let's not get carried away. You're still a novel. Like you're coming to say the drasha, you can do that. Amalei Rav. Rav said, Tanya, there's a brayso b'vat shelo yamid turgum. You can't bring a turgum. I mean, then you want to teach in Torah in public, you could do that, but you can't go and put it on a loudspeaker and make it crazy and whatever. Yeah, they'll hear. It's his job. So how then is everyone going to... But how is it going to be possible that everyone's going to hear the drasha? Ki hadatanya, like we say in the Brayse, Maisu meis b'nai Rabbi Yehuda bar Ilai became a novel. His son died. But Nichnas the Beis Hamedrash, and he came into shul. He came into the Beis Hamedrash to teach. Nichnas Rabbi Chananya ben Akavia, Rabbi Chananya ben Akavia been with him. The Yosha B'tzidai and sat alongside him. The Locha Shula Rabbi Chananya ben Akavia, and he quietly told over the Torah that he was going to say to Rabbi Chananya ben Akavia. Rabbi Chananya ben Akavia can't be a Turgaman himself. He then himself told it liturgaman to a meturgaman, and the meturgaman Hishmiel Rabin. So like a cliche over here, like making tea on Shabbos. He he said, you're going to go and.
Wow.
Now, just very interesting. Before we go weiter over here, so Taisus over here, the big one that wraps around, and then the one on the bottom. We'll talk about the one on the bottom. The one on the top talks more about Kfiyas Hamita and. Atifas Harosh, he basically talks about how it's not Negeh nowadays. I'll just tell you one of the reasons why he says we don't do Atifas Harosh nowadays. He references a Gemara later on that says that there's going to be, that Atifas Harosh is basically to be done the same way the Yishmaelim, the Arabs, the Muslims, how they cover themselves. Yeah, our Atifas Harosh is the way basically they dress. I don't know if it's exactly the same thing, but the idea of the turban on the head and covering the eyes, I don't know if it's like with the way the women wear their Burkish, I don't know what they call it, but I'm not exactly sure 100%, but whatever, that's the Gemara later on, I think on Chavdal Chavhei. So Tosfos mentions that since that's the ikiyum of what Atifas Harosh is, nowadays it's like the Rishonim will speak this out more or less, that on some level it's like, it's going to create a Kalos Rosh. So some Rishonim understand it to mean, or Achronim understand the Kalos Rosh to be that the Goyim are going to look at the way we behave and they're going to be like, what, look at these Jews, they're crazy with the whatever, which is very difficult to understand why that would be a problem. We don't really ever really take their opinion into account, but I mean, some people explain it that way.
Dumb guy.
The pashtus. There you go. Right. So.
Oh,
I don't like that.
I don't like that. Oh. I'll forget. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah.
See the way. So, but the more I think the more Mekobel Mahalach is. I mean, the Beis Yosef actually, who again lived in Eretz Yisrael eventually, like he was amongst Yishmaelim. So it's unlikely that there would have been any Kalos Rosh if a Yid was wearing the clothing of. I mean, if that was the common garb in that area, there probably wouldn't have been much of. So and the Beis Yosef actually says it's mutter. He says, in fact, one should be, we know Atifas Harosh. The Ramah says no. Ramah, who did not live, well, he did eventually, but I'm saying the Ramah who comes from the Rishonim that are from Europe, where they really didn't see too many Yishmaelim, probably felt pretty strongly that it was a very strange thing to do, to cover your head like that. But the question is, what is the Kalos Rosh? So I think Mefarshim speak out that the Kalos Rosh isn't what the Goyim are going to think, but it's more that because it's such a strange behavior, it's going to create a Kalos Rosh amongst the Avelim, meaning a person's going to feel strange and weird, and it's going to create some type of lightness in your Avelis, similar to the idea, I think the Rishonim speak out, that much in the same way that we tell an Avel not to hold a baby, the Gemara says, because holding a baby is just it's a very happy thing. We don't want an Avel to hold a baby because...
Avelim don't hold babies?
Not really, no. The Gemara says later on, you're not supposed to hold a baby if you can avoid it, yeah, because obviously if the baby needs you, but I'm saying it's something, if you've ever held a baby, which you all have, you know how it makes you feel. I mean, it's...
a mother.
Mother. That's what I said. If you have to, you have to. But I'm saying, generally speaking, well, can I hold it? It's usually considered. Yeah, I mean, holding a baby is a very shema thing. It's warms your heart. You feel warm. You feel connected. That's not the way a novel is supposed to feel. The novel is supposed to be experiencing what he's going through. And so the Rishonim draw a comparison between the kalus rosh that can be created by a baby to this kalus rosh that can be created by the atifas harosh. So therefore, they say nowadays it's not again. That's this first place. The second place talks about talk very very quickly about the issur to learn Torah as a novel, right? So we saw earlier in the Gemara when we were going through that long Gemara of all of the different things that are negayah for a mitzvah, for a menuda, and all these other things. One of the things that was mentioned was learning Torah by a novel is aser, and it brought a pasuk. What did the pasuk say? The pasuk said, of doim. What was the pasuk? I forget the pasuk exactly. Ha'anek doim. That was what was being right. He says it was talking to, I think, it was Cheskel, I think, who said to him, you should be a doim. Doim meaning silent. Therefore, it meant not to learn Torah. So the question that Tosfos over here asks is, do you take that to be bedafka, that it means nothing, meaning that there's nothing you're allowed to learn? Doim means silence. So that means even those things that on Tisha B'Av we tell a person he's allowed to learn. So for instance, you could learn the Gemara's in Gittin that talk about the Churban, and you could talk about Hilchos Avelos. So we say all of these, or Eiv, all of these different things.
You allowed to learn this whole parak.
As on Tisha B'Av. On Tisha B'Av, yeah. So
as a novel also.
As us. Halach l'maisa, that's how we hold.
Yeah, you could learn this parak.
So
Tosfos, I see people in the vast areas with storm stacks.
So we'll get there. That's not like the Mishnah Berurah, but yeah.
I could learn that.
So no, one second. Let's go in order. Step one is Tosfos has a chakira over here. Do we say that the pasuk of doim tells me nothing's, or do we say that no, just like Tisha B'Av, it's aser? And why is it aser on Tisha B'Av? Because it's aser on Tisha B'Av to learn Torah because it's Torah is provides simcha. Therefore, Torah provides simcha, so it's going to be aser. So therefore, those things that are not going to provide that same simcha because they're discussing inyanim that are sort of sobering, that it's going to be mutter on Tisha B'Av. Do we say the same thing by Avelis? Tosfos has this chakira. It's machlokes rishonim whether we say that you're allowed to even learn dvarim hamutar. Then there's another shaila that says is do we say that when we say that it's also to learn Torah on Tisha B'Av, as an avel, is that mean that you're potter from mitzvahs Talmud Torah, or do we just mean that it's aser? Meaning it could be it's totally in the same machlokes. If you hold there are things you're allowed to learn, then avada you're mechuyev to learn those things because you have a mitzvahs Talmud Torah every day. Who says you're not? What the din of an avel not to learn Torah is all through Shiva. How did the rabbis have a heter to tell you not to learn Torah for 7 days? It's mitzvah minat Torah, Talmud Torah. You can't be mevatel that mitzvah. So some Rishonim want to speak out that what it means is that avada you still have a chiyuv to learn Torah, and you'll have a chiyuv to learn those things that are mutter. It's just that you're not allowed to learn the other things that are going to be aser, and that'll fit with that mahalach. And other Rishonim seem to be mashma that no. The understanding is that yesh koyach biyad chachamim to be matir divrei Torah b'shaval, a dvar Torah, but it's referred to as b'shaval taseh. They're not telling you go do an aveira. They're saying you don't have to do it. They have the ability to do that, and they're basically saying you're potter from Talmud Torah during the week of yeshiva, and therefore those shittas of Rishonim would basically hold you can't learn anything, and not like Tisha B'Av where you had dvarim mutar. The Mishnah Berurah paskins, the way the post can come out is we generally hold that just like by Tisha B'Av you have dvarim hamutarim that you're allowed to learn these sugyas, so too that would be by Avelos. The shaila by in the poskim in Tisha B'Av is, are you allowed to learn? This is where the Mishnah Berurah doesn't talk about Hilchos Avelos. The Mishnah talks about Hilchos Tisha B'Av, but Hilchos Tisha B'Av, Mishnah Berurah is pretty clear. What about learning these inyanim be'iyun? Are you allowed to delve into these inyanim? So to learn them be'iyun, the Mishnah Berurah is pretty clear from the Rishonim that you're not supposed to do that. That's also. Although the Rosh Zalman does say that does not mean that one must learn superficially. You need to learn it and you need to understand it. Learning Torah there's a way to learn Torah. In fact, I think there was a shaila asked to Chaim Kanievsky was when Rabbi Yalei passed, or maybe it was Rabbi Yalei passed when Rabbi Yalei him when maybe it was Chaim's mother passed. I forget exactly how it went down, but there was asked to Rabbi Chaim, whether one would be allowed to learn be'iyun. He says no, you're not supposed to learn be'iyun, but not superficially, meaning about the person's supposed to understand what's going on. There's a famous story of the Rogatchover. This is the story that I'll say over here. The Rogatchover guy was, so there's the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says that there's a heter to learn as an ovel. Why? A heter to learn as an ovel, even regular, meaning that this price is shaloik halacha according to Yerushalmi, for someone who's lohut achar haTorah. Lohut achar haTorah means he's insane. He's insane in love with the Torah. Meaning, if a person's love for the Torah is so insane that telling him that he can't learn would make him in Yiddish oismensch. He literally would become. It's more than being in the pain of an avelis, meaning it would make him come to a sakana, meaning it could really be a dangerous thing. then it would be mutter. The story with the Ragat Shavagain is they say, I think the Ben Ishchai quotes a story. It doesn't quote him in the Bishmai, but basically says Yesh Chacham Echad, and since Pashas is referring to the Ragat Shavagain, who would lock himself during Avelis, locked himself up in a room, didn't let anyone, and he would learn Torah Be'iyun. Mamish didn't change his normal learning, and they asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I know I'm going to get din v'cheshbon on this afterwards, but what am I going to do? I have to do it. I can't not do it." Which again, you have to know how to explain that story because that's not a simple thing. I mean, he's a Rogachow guy, was a big tzaddik. Obviously, he wasn't being over in Averis. So they say that he was relying on this Yerushalmi, that he was basically, as an Anav, didn't want to say, I'm like that person that the Yerushalmi is talking about, who's this Lahota. I mean, I'm so in love with the Torah that he didn't want people to think that he's, he didn't want to appear as a big Balgaiva. So he said, all right, no, I'll deal with it, whatever. And that's why he did it privately, so people shouldn't see. You have to sort of look into it. But again, the Rosh Zaman, I think, is saying the most practical part, which is if you're going to learn these in Yonim, don't learn them superficially. There's no simcha in learning things superficially. You got to learn it to understand them. And if learning it to understand it requires what you or I might call Eon, because let's be honest, just reading it superficially is not understanding it. Someone else might look at what our basic learning, someone else might look at that and be like, oh my gosh, you're really being Ma'ayin. Chaim Kanievsky would look at it and say, yeah, it's like reading a newspaper. You know what I mean? Like, so everyone has to know what for them is the key. Basically, when they ask from Chaim this question of how is it mutter to learn the Dvarim and Mutarim, on as a novel during Tisha B'av, he says the reason why the Dvarim and Mutarim are mutter is because even though all Torah has a simcha in it, but if you're learning a topic that brings you one to have deeper thoughts of tshuva, then all the poskim speak out that divrei mussar is 100% mutter, meaning on Tisha B'av as a novel. The whole purpose of the day, the whole purpose of Avelos is to bring a person to have a connection to Kadosh Baruch Hu. So obviously, opening up a Mesilas Yesharim, even though you're quoting psukim, whatever it is, that's 100% mutter. But anyway, okay, so that's a little bit the discussion of the halachas. So that's another thing they talk about is which I forget who says this, but when you're talking about the Avela, the Ritva I think says this a little earlier, that when you're learning the halachas of Avelos, even Be'iyun is going to be mutter, because in order to know what to do, la halacha, I think they bring a story like that, like from Chaim Brisker had the minig that when he said when he would learn, it had to be Be'iyun. He didn't really know any other way. Meaning, if I'm going to be learning something practically, the only way to do that is to delve. Because if I don't delve, then I'm going to come out with something that's not 100%, and it has to be. It's okay. You have to ask your local Orthodox rabbi what to do. Things the Gemara, a bunch of cases. So the Gemara says like this. Taner Rabbanim. Avil Gimel Yomim Rishon. The first 3 days of an Avelos also laniach tefillin. This is also a big sugi. We're not going to go through it. Also laniach tefillin. It's also for an Avil to wear tefillin for the first 3 days. Mishlishi ve'elech ushlishi bichlal. Now again, from the third day and on, and including the third day, mutter laniach tefillin. So you have to just what did we just?
I forgot what I did. What did I do?
The first day, yeah.
First day you don't. We possibly, and you'll see in a second why that is. So Avil, the first 3 days is not allowed to wear tefillin, and then we said from the third day and on, including the third day, he's allowed to. So which one is it? So we'll explain it in a minute in detail, but this is going to sound a lot like Abba Shaul, right? What did we say from Abba Shaul? Miktas hayom kikulo. Yeah. So once you get the first minute of the day, you're good. Which means really, the way we understand that is, the way most Rishonim understand that is because Miktas hayom kikulo, once you start the morning of the third day, even if you didn't put tefillin on, once you have the first moment of the day, now you're done. The third day, you're allowed to wear tefillin. Right? So you already know you can shtickle Avelos in the morning, you knocked out your third day. So really, this first opinion holds. So when we say for Gimel Yomim Rishonim, we mean 2 and a bit. So 2 and a bit is aser. The third day is mutter. In bo upanim chadashos, what happens now if someone is coming to me Menachem Avil and they have not been Menachem Avil yet, and they're coming in on a day, let's say the third day, where you're wearing tefillin, and they're not going to know if this is your first day, second day, your third day. They might think this is your first day. They might think he's wearing tefillin on his first day. He's not supposed to be doing that. He says, you don't have to take them off, meaning you don't have to be concerned for Marasayan. Divrei Rebbe Elazar. Rebbe Elazar says 2 important halachas, which Rabbi Yeshua is going to argue on. Point number 1 is how many days one not wear tefillin. According to him, 2 days. Right? We're reading it. The third day is the little shtickle, but really 2 days. The second halacha he holds is that if someone walks in, sees you wearing tefillin, knowing whether it's your first or your second or your third day, we ignore it. Who cares? Don't take your tefillin off. Rabbi Yeshua is going to argue on both points. No. Avel beis yomim rishonim, which will mean what? Thursday. Right? And this is halacha. All right. Avel beis yomim harishonim aser laniach tefillin. Right? Which really means the first day don't wear tefillin, second day you could already wear. Misheni Ushneni Bechlal Mutter Laniach Tefillin. Ve'imbo Panim Chadasho. So the first part he argues on, he goes from 3 down to 2, which is really 2 down to 1. And the second halacha of Marsayin, he says, "Ve'imbo Panim Chadasho Scholitz." It says you have to be choshesh for someone thinking that you're wearing tefillin on the wrong day. Now, it's interesting to understand that because of their double argument, it comes out that on the first day, everyone agrees you can't wear tefillin. On the second day, they argue whether you can or can't. Rabbi Yeshua says if someone shows up on that day, you got to take it off, right? And if you're wearing them, Rabbi Eliezer would say take it off because you're not supposed to be wearing tefillin then. On the third day, Rabbi Eliezer would say you can wear it. If someone shows up, you don't have to take it off. And Rabbi Yeshua would say if someone shows up on the day, you got to take them off because of a Marasign, right? Right, 4th day, 5th day, 6th day, right? Because he doesn't know, unless I guess you have a sign up in the house where today's the 3rd day of my event, unless the person does that. Which again could be it's not a heter. Maris ayin, you can't come up with your own ways around Maris ayin. Amar of Masna, my time of the Rebbe Eliezer. What's the reason for Rebbe Eliezer's opinion that he holds that it's 3, really meaning 2 days? The pasuk says, "Vayismu yemei bechi evel Moshe." Do you see that the days of bechi of Moshe's avelus finished? Yemei is a plural lashon, and the smallest amount of plural is 2. Therefore, you see that according to Rebbe Eliezer, you need 2 days. Amar of Eina, my time of the Rebbe Yeshua. Where does he get 1 day from? The pasuk says, "V'achbiyasa kiyoim mar," and it's 1 day. Okay, fine. So you see, each one of them have their opinion. I, Rebbe Yeshua, not. What are you going to do with the other pasuk? Haksiv, you tell me you may. Shiny Moshe the Takif Avele, meaning maybe Moshe Rabbeinu was very needed by all of Klal Yisrael. The people therefore were, they were no even a stronger avelus of 2 days. But for a regular person, it would only be 1 day. And the assumption is that maybe the strength of that 2-day avelus was specific to Moshe, and don't assume that from there it means the rest of us would be knowing that same strong avelus for 2 days. For the rest of us, we would only be knowing 1 day of no tefillin, and therefore no raya. And therefore he holds it's 1 day. Rebbe Eliezer, who holds 2 days, Nami haksiv achriyasa ki yoimar. Why not go there to find one pasuk? He says no. Ikar merira chad yom. He says I do. That pasuk is just telling me that the primary bitterness of the avelus is 1 day, but it doesn't mean that there isn't an extra level of meriris on the second day also, and therefore he holds it's going to be 2 days. Okay, Amar Ula, what's the halacha? Halacha ki Rebbe Eliezer b'chalitza, meaning that he holds that mitzad the din of Maris Ayin, the halacha is we're not chosh for Maris Ayin only on the 3rd day, which is where Rebbe Eliezer said his actual halacha. The halacha ki Rebbe Yeshua, but the halacha is like Rebbe Yeshua b'hanacha that we only say don't wear it on the 1st day, right? So now, what's the shaila? For the Gemara, yiboyelahu b'sheni leula chaylitza ein chaylitz. Meaning, what do you do on the 2nd day? On the 2nd day, we just said you wear tefillin. What happens if someone shows up on the 2nd day? Are we concerned for Maris Ayin or not? So you might say, well, you paskin like the Maris Ayin Shiloh, like Rebbe Eliezer, that we're not choshesh, but that he only said it by the 3rd day. Maybe the halacha is that on the 2nd day, where you don't have to wear tefillin, where you're allowed to wear tefillin, and once you're allowed to, you must wear tefillin. Do we say that there's a Maris Ayin there also? Meaning because here there's a little bit more of a reason to make the argument, because at least you're compromising the halacha. Rebbe Yeshua, maybe according to Rebbe Eliezer, who says that there's no Maris Ayin problem, maybe he'd be masking that there's a Maris Ayin problem on day 2 when Rebbe Yehoshua, when Rebbe Eliezer says that on that day you're not supposed to wear tefillin. So Toshma, the Gemara says, Amar Ula cholat uminiach afilu me'apamim. He says, yes, on the 2nd day we are choshesh for Maris Ayin, which means that day 1, what the Gemara is saying is don't wear tefillin. Day 2, wear tefillin, and if someone walks in, take them off. No matter how many times they walk in. Day 3, you don't wear tefillin, and if someone walks in, you can take them off. I guess the assumption is that by the 3rd day, we assume most people are going to know this isn't your 1st day, whereas in the 2nd day, they might not know. Therefore, you have to be choshesh. Tanya Nami Bryce says the same thing. You would have been sema omer cholutz uminiach afilu me'apamim. Fine. Rava Amar Kivin Shehiniach Shuv Ein Cholutz. He argues. Rava says that no, that on the 2nd day, also Ein Cholutz. You don't have to be concerned for Maris Ayin even on the 2nd day. Fred the Gemara, 1 second. Isn't Rava who the Amar Halach Ketanati done? The Amar Shlosha. Wasn't Rava the one who on Amud Aleph, Chaf Amud Aleph, was the one person who said that the halach is like Rebbe Eliezer and like Beishamai, like our Mishnah, who holds that the first 3 days are so important that we do not say that Avelus is going to be canceled by Yontiv unless you first had 3 days of Avelus. Meaning we hold that even an hour, even a minute of Avelus before Yontiv, and Yontiv knocks it out. Rava held like Beishamai, like Rebbe Eliezer, who held that no, you need the 3 days in order to be mevatel. Meaning why? Because these 3 days are really important So how could Rava hold that
You're
you're allowed to wear tefillin on the second and third day, and if someone walks in, you don't have to take them off? Shouldn't he hold that on all 3 days? Shouldn't he at least hold like Rebbe Eliezer? Gemara says no, mitzvah shani. Mitzvah shani, why? Because when did he say what we were saying before? Avela, so it is required for 3 days in order for Yontif to cancel it. That's just talking about the Avelis itself. But if here you're talking about being Mavatala a mitzvah sasem in Atayra of tefillin, that's a different story. I'm not going to say that you can't wear.
Because the mitzvah.
Well, okay, so he'll argue that. So he obviously argues on Ula, meaning he holds that even on the second day there's no problem with Meir sign. I mean that's not
even though the veil is 3 days.
Yeah, meaning the fact that he holds meaning Rav is basically passing that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehoshua when it comes to how many days you don't wear tefillin, only the first day.
Right.
And he passes like Rabbi Eliezer that there's no marasayin even on the second day, meaning he takes the psak.
Even though he holds 3 days for the ikr.
Even though he holds 3 days of the ikr b'negei being mevatalit, but when it comes to a mitzvah, it's going to be different. No brayso. Tana Rabbanan. Oval Gimel Yomim Rishon, the first 3 days of Avelos. Also b'malach, he's not allowed to do malach. We learned this earlier in the Gemara. Even if a person is an ani and he's misparnas min tzedakah, the halach is he's also b'malach. It's a very serious thing during the first 3 days. From the third day and on, he can do malacha, but it has to be done b'tzina quietly. Isha and a woman who's an avelis, toive bethelach b'soich beisa can do it as well inside her house.
Not the first 3 days.
Not the first 3 days. It's just distinguishing between an ani and misparnas. I'm not 100%
I think we do
sure.
all 7 days.
I think all days.
I don't think all 7 days.
I'm not 100% sure. That I don't know. So let's say a person's himself in Avel. So during the first 3 days, if he becomes an Avel, and now there's someone else that he wants to be Menachem Avel. So let's say a person becomes an Avel, loses his brother or whatever, and now a friend of his also lost his brother, and he wants to go be Menachem Avel with his friend. Is he allowed to go be Menachem Avel with his friend? So during the first 3 days of his own Avelis, he's not allowed to. Mikan ve'elach, but from that point on, while he is still in his Shiva, he goes and he does not sit amongst the people who are paying the Shiva call, but rather he sits he sits amongst the other people in that house. So he visits the home, sits in the low chair amongst the people who are being comforted, and he can continue his Shiva there while he's being Menachem. So he can be Menachem and be Misnachem at the same time. Continues the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, Abrayso, Aval Gimel Yomim Harishonim, Asur b'She'ela Shalom. He's not allowed to say Shalom Aleichem to someone. Mishlosha v'ad Shiva, from the third day and to the seventh day, Meshiv ve'ena Shayil. He doesn't ask, but he can respond. So on the first 3 days, he ignores it even if someone says Shalom Aleichem. On the third day, from the third day and on, the seventh day of his Shiva, he does not initiate, but he can respond. Mikan ve'elach, from Shiva and on, from the rest of Shloshim, really forever, Sholom Meshiv Kedarko, he's allowed to say hello and goodbye, even during Shloshim. That's what the Gemara starts with. We'll see in a moment if that's true or not. We'll see in the Gemara. Hatanya asked the Gemara, Maisa u'Mesu banav shel Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva's children had passed. Nichnesu kol Yisrael of hispidum hesped gadol, and everyone came in, of course, to be masked. Rabbi Akiva's children were big, great tzaddikim. The shas petirasin, and as they were leaving, Amad Rabbi Akiva stood up, al safsel gadol, on a big couch. Shimu, please listen to what I'm about to say. Afilu shnei banim chasanim, even had my 2 children been chasanim, meaning which would have even been a loss. Menuchamu b'shvil kavod shasis, and what you've done by coming and be Menachem Avel has done me a great comfort. Ve'im b'shvil akiva basam, and if the only reason why you're here is because of me, you didn't have to do that, because harikama akiva b'shuk. Ella, why did you come? You came because of the Torah. Ella kachamartem. This must be what you said to yourself. Torah selikov b'libai, that these people, these sons of mine, were big Talmidei Chacham, big tzaddikim. They had tons of Torah in their hearts, and you came to be Menachem, the loss of the Torah. The kol shekain shescharchem kafel, what you've done, you're going to receive double reward for this. Lichu levatechem l'shalom, go to your house in shalom. What's the question? You see Rabbi Akiva, Mamish in the middle of his shiva. Went ahead and was. It seems like he was. Not only was he responding, he was initiating she'ela shalom. So Gemara says kavod rabbim shiny. When you're talking about kavod rabbim is different. If it's a kavod rabbim, you're allowed to say so. For whatever reason, if it's a big group of people, then you can. But einachanami, normally the halacha would be, at least at this point in the Gemara, that during the first 3 you can't do anything. From 3 to 7 you can only respond, and after 7 to shloshim and on, you can do whatever you want for the Gemara. Or let's continue. Migimel v'adzayin meishiv ve'ena shayil. You're telling me from the 3rd day and on you're allowed to respond, but you can't initiate. Mikan ve'elach shayil meishiv kedarkei. That point on, you're allowed to do whatever you want. Yes, the Gemara is stiriminu, and this is the halacha, as the rabbi is pointing out. A person finds his friend is an avel. The soich lamed yoim midabri may tanchumen. You're supposed to comfort him during the shloshim. The eno shoyel b'shlom, and you don't ask how he's doing. Don't ask shalom aleichem. Why? Because it's going to force him to have to respond, and he's not supposed to respond. But after shloshim, shoyel b'shlomo, you could say shalom aleichem to him, so that he'll respond. Ve'ena medaber imay tenchumin. Continues the brisa, but that's the kasha, by the way. The kasha is you see that during shloshim, you're not supposed to say shalom aleichem. Why? Because he's not supposed to respond to you. But we just said 2 seconds ago that during shloshim he can even say hello to you. So that's the stira. But the brisa continues and says, Meisa ishta, if a person's wife dies, v'nosa isha acheres, and now he married someone else, and it's within shloshim, right? So within shloshim he marries someone else. So now he's got a new wife, but he's still sort of an ovel over his first wife. If you're going to be menachem over him over his first wife, you can't go into the new house because it's going to be disrespectful to the new wife that she's going to have to hear that you're being menachem him on the loss of his first wife when she's the new wife. Yeah, but if you find them in the street, meaning inside shloshim, you can speak to him, you can talk to him with divrei nechama, and it's mashma, you could say shalom aleichem to him. So again, what's the kasha? Like I said before, from this entire brayso, you see that during shloshim, we have to be very careful about what you say to an avel because he's not allowed to respond to you. And yet the brayso we said earlier said that during shloshim, the avel's allowed to say hello and goodbye, and he can initiate on his own. So how do you square the circle? Amar Ravidi Barav, and I'll explain. Who shoyl b'sholom acherim? The avel is allowed to ask b'sholom acherim, she'acherim shuriyim b'sholom, because the people that he's speaking to are themselves not an avel, so therefore he's allowed to do that. Acherim ein shoylim b'shloimai, shehu ein oishari b'sholom, because he himself is not in b'sholom, meaning he's an avel, and therefore the Allah is going to. So therefore, the brayso that says that it's going to be mutter to do whatever you want after. During shloshim is talking about the avel speaking to acherim. Acherim are not navelos, and therefore it's allowed to be done. Whereas the acherim not saying shalom aleichem to the avel's he's not b'shalom. You shouldn't be asking him shayla shalom. Therefore it's inappropriate. More says 1 second. Hamid meshiv michlal de shaylin. But lefi what you just said, it comes out. Read the brayso again. The brayso that said that the avel is allowed to be shoel u'meishiv, it's mashma you're allowed to say something to him, and you just said 2 seconds ago that the acherim shouldn't be asking of him. So it's michlal de shaylin alei. So Gemara says no. It's talking about the lo yadi. The people who asked didn't know that he was an avel, so they said shalom aleichem. So okay, so he was allowed to respond. But enechanami, if they knew he was, they wouldn't be allowed to. Gemara says 1 second. If it's talking about a scenario where the people who asked shalom aleichem didn't know, hasam nami. Even in the first 3 days in that brayso where the halacha was that it says over there that the avel is not allowed to say shalom or answer. If the lo yadi, why can't he answer? Meaning, if the whole svara is that the acherim didn't know, then he should even be mutter to answer in the first 3 days. So he says no. In the first 3 days, hasam moedalahu, his responsibility as an avel in his first 3 days is to inform everyone he meets. I'm an avel. I'm like, Lorena, but I'm saying a person is supposed to inform someone. Therefore, they'll know not to say shalom aleichem. So therefore, the halacha is he doesn't respond to shalom aleichem. Whereas after the 3rd day, he has no responsibility to inform everyone that he's an avel. And therefore, if someone doesn't know and asks him, "How you doing, shalom aleichem?" He's the halacha is not supposed to respond. Right? V'loi mahadelu.
So when you see someone on the street, 4th day, and says, "Hey, what's up? I haven't seen you. How you doing? What's up?"
So they're allowed to respond. Yeah, sure. I mean, he probably shouldn't be outside the house too much, but yeah. I mean, you're supposed to be.
You don't need the house. Yeah. So what's he doing outside the house?
That's why when you go to if you ever pay shiva call, you don't say, "Hey, what's up? How you doing?"
Right. Yeah. I never know what to say. The first thing
you're not supposed to say anything.
He's supposed to.
Yeah, you let him initiate. You're there. You know, the beauty of being menachem avla. I heard this once, such a beautiful idea. You're not there as a human. You're not there for him. Like it's not you. You're a Jew, and your body is doing the mitzvah. You're just providing him. He needs to be around people. It's like if you hear about a person who's getting married and he doesn't have a lot of friends. It's maybe a sad matzav. He doesn't care who's dancing. He just wants to have people dancing because it's like nebuch. No one wants to show up to a wedding where it's like one guy playing a flute and 3 people dancing. He doesn't care who it is. You can hire ringers. It'll help. An avel needs to have. You fill the room. He feels. He feels. He has hope. Obviously, close friends are going to help. saying it, it's sometimes. Either way. So what is the Gemara answering? Then Hasanami even on the first 3 days. The Gemara says no. Hasan Maidalu, Mahadalu. So therefore he's going to tell him he's not going to respond. And therefore he is going to respond. So therefore he has to say you can't do it. Uraminu asked the Gemara a separate price. A person finds someone during the middle of this 12 months. You're supposed to tell him different tanchumen. The ain't a shoyl b'shlama, and you don't ask. And here it's talking about 12 months. So this is a kol shekain. If I can't be shoyl shlama 12 months, I certainly can't be shoyl shlama 30 days. And it said in the first brisa that he could do it even within 30 days. You can start saying shalom aleichem to him after Yud Beis Chodesh. And you don't mention anything about the loss because you don't want to remind him of something that's already, quote unquote, he's gotten over. You can sort of not mention it by name. Don't mention the father's name, but you say, you look good now, you shaved, whatever, whatever you're going to say to him. You can speak it to him sort of indirectly, but don't mention specifically, how are you doing now that you're missing your father? You don't want to remind someone of that pain. But what's the kasha? Well, let's first finish the price. Rav Meir says, what is a person compared to who speaks to someone who he finds after Yud Beis Chodesh and mentions the avelos, mentions the loss of the father, who mentions the loss of the parent? What does he compare it to? La'adam shenishbara ragle. A person breaks his leg, v'chaysa, and his leg got better. Motzei roife, and a doctor finds him and says to him, v'amar lai, klach etzli, come to my office, shani shaver, let me re-break your leg, v'arpe'ena, and let me show you how good I am at fixing it. That's what it is. A person is in avelos, he's gone through the process of healing, and now you're reminding him after 12 months about the thing that he lost. It's like you're re-breaking his leg. What are you, crazy? What are you doing? Right? To know that I'm the best doctor in the neighborhood, I'll show you how I fix legs. So do me a favor, my leg's good already. Don't be mentioning this. What's the kasha? The whole brisa over here is mentioning that you see that inside of 12 months, you're allowed to say shalom aleichem to him. Sorry, inside of 12 months you can't. After 12 months you can. And we saw our brisa said that in 30 days you can already. Where it says like kasha. When we're talking about not saying shalom aleichem, then within 12 months, it's referring to about his father and mother. It's going to be mother. Gemara says, meaning in the brisa that we saw of 30 days, meaning this brisa said you can speak indirectly as long as you don't mention the name. So why don't right? So why don't we say that by Shar Kroivim that's going to be mutter even by 30 days? Why don't we say the same thing? And the Gemara says you do. Oh, sorry, that's the answer. That just means like the normal way, but you'd be allowed to do it the other way. We'll pause here.